doesn't exist. It no longer exists. I'm gonna fly through a haze of delight. Close my fears till they die. I'm gonna dream in this summer coma. In this summer coma. Can no longer deal with this life.
Hi, I'm Michael Everts, and this is Fit to be Read. Today I'm cautiously wading into the mind of Aldous Huxley and reviewing his provocative work, Brave New World. Brave New World is a classic and iconic dystopian novel, and it is about as fit to be read as it gets. I would recommend Brave New World to those readers who like the exploration of dystopian settings that imagine or warn of a direction our own world may be heading. I recommend this also for those who subscribe to the idea that there exists such a category as must-read American literature. This title belongs on such a list, if such a list exists. Typically, my reviews are spoiler-free until we get to the likes and dislikes section. That will not be the case today. I don't think you need to worry about spoilers with this one. I don't think anyone gets to the end of this book thinking, this was exhilarating. Too bad the big surprises were spoiled. This just isn't that type of a book. I will begin with a general summary of the novel, plot points, and some mild investigation into Huxley's messaging. Brave New World, of course, ranked very high on my top 150 science fiction books video. If you still need to watch that 2-hour behemoth of a video, click on the thumbnail that's going to be at the end of this episode. Brave New World, published in 1932, is often considered must-read sci-fi. This book is Huxley's fantasy or prediction of how the world might look in the future. In this imagined dystopia, the world values happiness, consumption, social stability, and contentment over all else. Humans are grown in labs and hatcheries and are conditioned to think and act in certain ways, generally emotionless, and are bred into castes. Individuality does not exist. Everyone belongs to everyone else. Emotional response is addressed both by the initial genetic, chemical, and hormonal manipulation and behavioral conditioning, and later, more acutely, the use of the psychotropic drugs called soma. Early in the story, we follow Bernard Marx, an alpha, and he is one of the few who is not quite content with this stay-in-your-lane society. He travels with his love interest Lenina to a savage reservation where they witness a more base or uncivilized way of living. They meet John the Savage at this reservation, and they invite him to experience their Brave New World. The experiment is less than successful, and John rages against promiscuity, the absence of art and religion, and the propensity of soma. He quickly devolves, and his story ends with suicide. Huxley's work is a satire, exaggerating elements of society that he finds ridiculous or dangerous. Big government, overbearing and inflated institution, eugenics, and sexual inhibition. Huxley's goal is to open people's minds to this and the potential threat of rampant consumerism, the totalitarian state, contented domination, and misuse of technology. Henry Ford, who's mentioned in the story, represents, yes, technology, but also advances in mass organizations, assembly lines, etc. In an interview with Mike Wallace years after this book, Huxley discusses the two main threats or elements that push us towards a brave new world. One being overpopulation, leading to interventionist and totalitarian government as resources cannot meet demand, and the second being the ability to mass organize. Ford is the representation of that in the book. I will put a link to this interview below in the descriptions if you want to take a closer look at it. Huxley's fantasy, a warning that is still today and always relevant, makes this book fit to be read. Here now are my 5 likes and 5 dislikes for Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Like number 1, the condemnation of the controlling or conditioning state, or really any institution, the satire, and how it perhaps ambiguously implicates more than only the obvious, meaning we see the condemnation of this dystopian Brave New World, but the satire finds more than just that in its crosshairs. Warnings abound, lest we find ourselves in a situation we didn't foresee. Technology misuse advancing as a tool for suppression is called out. Technology is not being called evil, it's rather neutral, but the danger is in how the state or institutions can use it as a tool. The purpose of the book is not the plot. The purpose is the examination of society, the price of utopia, the contemplation of freedom, technology, mores, and morals. It is to warn against the complacency and ignorance of who has the power and how that power is wielded, with a threat of an end result that finds us as a society happy in our slavery. Like number 2, the confused notion of John the Savage as hero, the head fake on this. By chapter 13, I'm curious to see if John turns out to be a device in the story that reveals how ludicrous everything else is, and if he is the sane and pragmatic hero of the story. He is far from being the hero. Were we not being led to expect that his love of Shakespeare and art and struggle and chivalry would be a more virtuous contrast to the immoral, convenient, unimaginative, and restrictive Brave New World? It really starts to unravel with his courtship of Lenina. She is throwing herself at him, and he is incoherent and mumbling and talking about bringing her the skin of a lion to prove his worth. He offers to sweep the floors to prove himself to this woman who has not provided any substance to engender such a devotion or obsession. Savage, who is seemingly the antithesis of the stupid people, is croning on about not being worthy of the vapid Lenina. Clearly there's some psychosis of not being loved enough by Linda, his mother, and his attraction to Lenina being some sort of transference, thus avoiding any need for Lenina to be substantive, to be worthy of his love. The point is, though, we get pulled away from any illusion that we might have had that this story was going to use John to present to us the example of what the world should look like. He is just as flawed as all of the other characters, if not more so. The world he comes from has its own institutions abusing the power of controlling the herd to think and behave one way with one universal set of values. Like number 3, the humor. The book is not humorous. It's serious with a lot of intentional absurdity. But because it is serious and dry and even lacking big, exciting moments, the smallest and most subtle instances of dry humor stand out. Chapter 13 begins with Lenina at work inoculating embryos for sleeping sickness, forlorn about John the Savage, and she's frustrated with Henry Foster, and she finally snaps at him. She forgets if she gave one of the embryos the injection, and decides to not risk giving a second injection. On the very next line we get to read, 22 years, 8 months, and 4 days later, a promising young alpha minus was to die of trypanosomiasis. There are a few of these dark, humorous moments, and they stand out in the otherwise antiseptic landscape of the story. Dislike number 1, Bernard returns from the reservation, aware that the director is going to humiliate him and transfer him to Iceland. After the director calls him out in front of everyone, Bernard drops the bomb that the director has a son. The director is embarrassed and resigned. This is a little bit of raw meat for us, and a delicious treat at that. It's also a bit of a tease, and definitely too short-lived. We wanted to see this guy handed his hat, and we were a little robbed of the payoff. Dislike number 2. Other than the director, no one else seems to get their comeuppance. As a thought piece, this is obviously irrelevant, but as a story, it's another characteristic of its mediocrity. Like number 4, Bernard's character feels more real once we see him bringing John the Savage to the Brave New World. He becomes a cocky, pompous twit. This doesn't replace his previous outcast nature and skepticism, it just adds more layer and complexity to his character. Dislike number 3, Bernard is abandoned somewhat as a focus of the story, and we don't get to see more of the previously promising character growth. I think he just became an inconvenience to the direction of the story, and was therefore abandoned or neglected. Dislike number 4, Brave New World is super boring. The storytelling pulling double duty of trying to tell a story while also offering a warning falls short on the side of delivering a riveting narrative. You can look at a novel like Atlas Shrugged, ignore Ayn Rand's motivations, and take away any of her naive political philosophy, and it still kind of stands on its own as a page-turner. Huxley's warnings, I believe, are more consequential and deserving of our energy and attention, but the story is predictable and flat. Like number 5, sticking with Atlas Shrugged comparisons, I love when some of the minor villains are just written as detestable with no redeeming values. The villains are villains in every way. No time is spent making them deeper by showing that they have a decent side or complexity. Wesley Mooch in Atlas Shrugged is just this sniveling exaggeration of a detestable person. Even his name, Mooch, it sounds slimy. Huxley unapologetically gives Fanny the same treatment. She is just the worst. I picture this debutante, spoiled doofus who's one inconvenience away from asking to speak to the manager. Generally in a novel, I'd prefer rich characters, but there are types of propaganda books where the world of the book is enriched with characters where we see only the one dominant trait or level, and we know exactly where we stand with them. This is not really a serious topic that comes up when discussing Brave New World, but can we just all agree Fanny is the worst? Dislike number 5, as much foresight into the future world that Huxley proposes, even he cannot escape that he is a product, in some ways, of his environment and conditioned to some degree by the time he lives in. The book is genius in challenging the reader to digest the contrast of the virtue and flaws of the Brave New World and the world and religion that John Savage was raised in. Huxley enlists an imaginary drug soma, religion, promiscuity versus monogamy, genetic manipulation, etc., as device tools to titillate us with examples of profound virtue or profound immorality or evil, except maybe in the case of religion, which is perhaps just another example of an institution that is ambiguous in that it is presented at times as virtuous and at other times as a potential additional institution for conditioning without questioning. Back to the dislike. It appears Huxley has this list of good things and his list of shockingly bad or offensive things. I contend his list is designed not only by his unique social perspective or philosophy, but also by him existing in 1930. One example is the promiscuity that's reveled at in the Brave New World. We, the readers, I believe, are expected to be aghast at sexual liberation, free-willing libidos, and the disdain for monogamy. In 2020, clearly there are those who are still aghast by such things, but for many, sexual liberation is seen as a great advancement in our culture. We have new and more inclusive definitions of family, and people are more conscientious and unlikely to shame others on the basis of a prolific sexuality. This book no doubt can inspire a lot of conversation and debate. I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments below, whether it be about the storytelling or the philosophy and ideas, or both. While I'm off to read more books, I will direct you to more great science fiction book reviews and some great parody music on this one. Or this one. Thank you for watching. I'm Michael Evertson. This is Fit to be Read.